going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and as always on Fridays, I aim to have a guest on this show, and this Friday is no different. And with me today will be Larry Holder from The Athletic. He's someone that was just a Saints fan growing up for a large period of my life, was really one of the writers that I always looked to as a primary point of reading, especially being kind of displaced from New Orleans and that being the city where the football team that I follow is from. You have to really seek out who really resonates with you as a storyteller. And that's always really been Larry Holder for me. So he's always been someone I've really looked up to as a journalist, and has just become a friend ever since joining this industry. But in line with this coaching tree series, I wanted to bring on someone that, I've been a Saints fan again since Sean Payton's inception as a head coach, really. But I ultimately, watched that from afar until the age of 18. I was able to attend a lot more Saints games while I was at Tulane, and I did miss that quite a bit when I moved to Philadelphia. But I only really covered the Saints as journalist for just one season with Sean Payton as head coach, in a credentialed sense of being able to go to training camp and see him work day in and day out. And so again, wanting to bring on someone that has really seen him throughout the entirety of his career on the Saints, and what that's really been like, and what he's kind of seen as those parallels to Bill Parcells, just again, as someone that has spent such a long time getting to know Sean as a person in the way that he has. And the way that this coaching tree series has gone, I know a lot of the time, you kind of start at the top and you look at the Big Tuna, for lack of a better term, in Bill Parcells. And I kind of did it the opposite way, where, Dan Campbell was just kind of a point of curiosity for me. And then obviously, I'd wanted to cover Sean Payton, but I just wanted to try something different, and kind of unintentionally took myself on this way up the coaching tree to Bill Parcells, because, again, there are plenty of articles that talk about this stuff and why some trees work and why some don't. But I really wanted to kind of form my own opinion on this and not try to overload myself with all this information, and just try to kind of watch, again, things like NFL films, which I really do recommend, especially for older coaches that you might not have been able to see while they were actually actively coaching, because hearing from the players that worked with them and hearing from the coach themselves, it really just gave me a lot of perspective. And I wasn't really expecting to kind of focus my Bill Parcells episode on just one decision and one relationship, and that being between him and Phil Simms at quarterback. But the emotional management of quarterback is something to me that is the paramount role of a head coach. And it's something that I started to kind of see talking about Dan Campbell bringing on Jeremy Reisman of Pride of Detroit, and how he's really handled that relationship with Matt Stafford, and very maturely handling that as kind of his first task as a head coach, and then having to kind of deal with the fact that Jared Goff wasn't wanted where he was, and kind of just got shipped off there, and being able to instill that confidence in him in the same way of a guy that you benched in Phil Simms and then made him go through a quarterback competition in order to get the job back. But the one thing that Phil Simms talks about is how much he appreciated the honesty, even if it was brutal at times, of Bill Parcells, because he always knew where he stood. And to me, that's something that is so important in a head coach, is that honesty. And as I talk about with Larry Holder, that is something that Sean Payton has in spades, but it's not something that comes without qualifiers or isn't a given thing. To me, you can't have honesty without trust and a genuine relationship with someone. Otherwise, it gets into the area of berating them. And so I am extremely curious and intrigued as just a football fan and a journalist that enjoys this sport from a lot of different angles, in watching how Sean Payton approaches this new relationship with Russell Wilson, which is a very different personality than Drew Brees, and someone that, is kind of set in their ways, and not in a bad way. But when you're in the league for as long as someone like Russell Wilson, how do you kind of handle undoing what you might think of as bad habits, and handling kind of a more, for lack of a better term, Hollywood personality? But to me, it's also just as important to kind of talk about what happens in the void of a good head coach. And Larry Holder is also someone that covered the season of Bountygate and the years before and after that, watching the psychological momentum change. But it really just shows the value of a true good head coach, just as much as, the departure of Drew Brees really showed the value of a good quarterback. But speaking of a value of a good quarterback, there's no one better to bring on to talk about an offensive guru than someone that might have thrown the most impressive flag football throw of all time that if you haven't downloaded Threads yet, Larry Holder's account should be your first point to check. The reason I wanted to bring you on was I've been doing this kind of coaching series of exploring, I guess now, the Parcells tree of limited from Dan Campbell, Sean Payton to Bill Parcells. But I wanted to bring someone on that spent time around one of those coaches for a fairly long time. And as someone, with the throwing prowess that you have, I thought that you would be the perfect person to bring on to talk about an offensive guru.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You started your Threads life bringing that back.
Oh, I had to. Are we recording? I didn't know if we are we like we starting like the conversation now?
Yes.
Okay. Just so I know where we're going here. It's I definitely had to make sure that people knew that it was actually me. So who would post a stupid video making fun of themselves other than me? And it's funny, that video, people have seen it over the years, and the backstory to that awfulness, where other people like around the country have used it to actually make fun of Derek Carr trying to throw the football to Devontae Adams last year. Someone sent it to me. I was like, man, poor Derek Carr. Now he's with the Saints. But no, that backstory goes to a media flag football game at the Greenbrier the first year the Saints had training camp up there. And actually, people who were watching up top, they had Zach Streep was watching, Kai Harley was watching, and saw this all happen live. And so it's lived in infamy. And I would blame actually Alex Restrepo from the Saints and the Pelicans, head of social media, who was filming that and has made that go viral forever. And it always comes back, because guess what? NFL quarterbacks actually do it too. So whenever it happens, you just say, all right, the guy just holdered. And I mean, look, so it's a real thing. It's not just amateur Larry. Like, real quarterbacks can actually do that sometimes.
If it makes you feel better, it's really not in the same level of embarrassment. But the highlight video from this last year's flag football game has a fun feature of me slipping and basically just sliding through the end zone. And that was my one highlight of being involved in that game, except for Ross Jackson catching me when I almost fell over. So I was the football at one point, but.
Well, there you go. Look, at least, let's make yours go viral. Maybe people will forget about me.
Unfortunately, Ross's best catch of the day was not caught on film. So alas,
of course. Yeah,
just a memory.
Just like the 6 passes I completed after that poor throw. Yes, that wasn't shown ever in the light of day either. But yeah, that's, media can look, silly media can splice it up and make you look bad, right? Isn't that what it is?
In the one that we played, I don't know if your guys' was this serious, but ours was very fast paced. And I was really not expecting that, but it did kind of give me almost an appreciation for how quickly football can go, because the amount of things that just happen at the same time and amount of moving parts, it did really give me an appreciation for seeing through all of that traffic with, an actual 11 on 11 type situation on the field.
So with you actually playing, not going to practice, but you actually on the field, it gave you, the speed of media people who are probably like running 30% as fast as the NFL people. That's what gave you the good feel, not going to practice, not going to games. It was that. Good.
Maybe it's just that I'm out of shape, and that's really what it was. But it was just like, oh, wow, like 15 people just moved. Like, I'm used to soccer where it's kind of a longer developing situation, and being able to account for people, I guess, longer away from me and being able to see more of a puzzle. And to me, it was just a bunch of mess and traffic and noise.
Well, yeah, because no one has any design to plays. It's like, hey, you go here. Hey, you go here. I don't know. I'm throwing the ball, whatever.
So they tried. But to get back on topic here, I didn't know that you went to Biloxi. Is there any college teams there to cover, or have you? I know that you covered LSU, obviously, but have there been any other teams besides like the Saints from an NFL perspective that you've covered?
I dabbled a little bit in covering the Houston Texans. This was before I covered the Saints, obviously, when I was working for the Galveston County Daily News This was from 03 to 05. And I covered some of that, some of their training camps, some of their games. And actually I covered David Carr. So, and when he was first there with the Texans, and obviously they were not a good team. So, but yeah, I covered, and throughout college, like I went to LSU, I covered the Nick Saban, the beginning of his era at LSU. So yeah, been covering big time football for a long, long time. But yeah, in Biloxi, I mean, I covered the Saints, and the other beat per se of the professional team that I covered was the ECHL. That is AA hockey, and they were the Mississippi Seawolves. And so I did not know hockey. I wrote it like it was basketball, but I covered them for 3 years in the kind of the downtime of Saints, but I was fully on Saints. So yeah, really, when I started in Biloxi in 06, it was really covering that season. It was really the first full season, full-time NFL beat job that I've had. And I've been doing it ever since.
So your first season was like Sean Payton and Drew Brees' first season.
I covered their whole ride from 06 training camp in Millsaps. That was insane. It was, and players from that era describe how that was the hardest training camp they've ever gone through. I could see it and totally believed it. I mean, it was still 2-a-days, padded practices, no indoor facility, 100-something degrees. It was brutal. And it certainly weeded out some of the people who Sean Payton wanted around and did not want around. And I think that was probably back to, I know our topic of kind of the Bill Parcells tree. I mean, that's what he came in immediately wanting to weed out and kind of put his stamp on there, because there definitely been a slippage within how hard people were working within the Saints. I mean, look, they're coming off of one of the more difficult seasons in the history of the NFL, having been displaced by Hurricane Katrina. Sean Payton's having to kind of rebuild a culture, or even really start a culture with the Saints. And Sean Payton he's coming straight from working with Bill Parcells one day to developing his own team the next day. And so he definitely still to this day, you'll hear things that he says that it is totally Bill Parcells. I mean, that is who he is. So much so, a funny story, how often and how tight they are. Bill Parcells bought a horse and was racing the horse, might have been up in Saratoga, and named the horse Dennis the Menace. And that was his nickname for Sean Payton, Dennis the Menace. So
that's kind of touching, actually.
Yeah, a little touching, but also a little jab. Basically, like Sean was like pestering, like I guess Bill Parcells was Mr. Wilson. I'm probably aging myself, and people, you're probably like, who's Mr. Wilson and who's Dennis the Menace? So, but yeah,
I know Dennis the Menace.
There you go. Okay, Mr. Wilson was the neighbor that Dennis pestered, and so the older neighbor, obviously, and so yeah, it was kind of that relationship. But look, Sean, to this day, leans on what Bill Parcells taught him, and will do so probably till the day he dies.
Yeah, just kind of watching the film of the 1986 season of the Giants and a video with Parcells and Belichick, just kind of the way that players spoke about Bill Parcells and his ability to really motivate and push their buttons and really get the most out of each one of them. Like, you hear about the kitschy things like the mouse traps and don't eat the cheese kind of thing. But to me, there is really, is a value of psychology and motivation behind that. And that's something to me that I think people kind of laugh at, in the same way that people laughed at the biting of the kneecaps thing that Dan Campbell said. But I think sometimes people kind of miss the point on what those kind of gimmicks are and how much things like attention to detail in the sense of, bringing their stuff from their locker room to away games and just kind of infusing that atmosphere. Like, how much did that attention to detail with Sean Payton really stick out to you?
Oh, he was always looking for some way to motivate, and it could be a team-wide thing. It could be an individual thing. I think Sean did such a good job of really knowing how to push a button, whether it's team wide or a position group or a player individually, whether it's making sure, say, hey, look, if things aren't going well, bring them up to the office. And even if it's a veteran player, kind of saying, look, you need to show it to me. You don't need to show it to me every day, but you got to show it to me at some points, or you're going to be gone. Like that's part of what Sean was able to do and really connect. And I feel like Sean, obviously it's the dazed and confused mantra, they're all the same age, but I'm getting older. So he has to stay fresh because the locker room basically stays the same age, and he's not getting any younger. So I think he's done a really good job of being able to find ways through the years, adapt and connect to people. And, it's worked wonders, really. And sometimes you have something that may fall flat, but it's not for a lack of trying. And so I do feel like, though, he's going forward, and he's probably going to use some of the tactics that he's used over the years in Denver that he used with the Saints, but also it's one thing where he thinks he may use some sort of motivational tactic. And even though he's used it 3 or 4 times, it's still fresh to that group. Maybe a couple of people like Drew Brees and Thomas Morstead were around for all of these, but 98% of the room hasn't heard this or hasn't done it. So, it's reusing things and yet staying fresh. And I think that's something that he's done a really good job. And that's a reason why he's lasted so long in the NFL.
Yeah, I am really curious to see kind of how he takes on really, it's not like he has a rookie quarterback over in Denver, and it's not like he has a lemon either, but he has certainly a personality in Russell Wilson. And, part of me kind of wishes Hard Knocks was being filmed there, because I'm just really curious to watch kind of their relationship. But, what would you kind of say was his biggest strength working with Drew Brees and really approaching that role of quarterback?
Well, I think he was fortunate that Drew Brees is a different cat compared to other quarterbacks. He is the ultimate student of the game. He's going to outsmart the defense. And that's the fact that Sean Payton linked up with Drew Brees. I mean, that's what helped make them be what they were. I mean, it's not that Sean didn't make Drew and Drew didn't make Sean. I think both of them were the perfect synergy. And that is extremely rare. So, look, Sean Payton knows the position. Drew Brees knows the position. Look, Sean is definitely kind of a more brash personality than Drew, but Drew's obviously competitive. One of the most competitive people that's ever been in the NFL. But Sean is certainly more brash than Drew. And so it's their relationship, I think, was a huge factor to that. And it's not to where that Sean didn't get on Drew. You didn't see it publicly a lot, maybe just even a little bit at all. But there's no doubt that they kind of pushed each other's buttons and knew what ticked with them. And so I think that was a huge factor there. I don't know if that would have worked out as well with other quarterbacks just because of Drew's skill set, not just physically, but mentally. And that's a huge thing. And there are 32 quarterbacks in the NFL every year starting each week. They're not all equal. And the coaches, they're not all equal. So, with Sean, look, and Sean worked with other quarterbacks certainly before Drew Brees. I mean, he goes back to working with Kerry Collins in New York. He goes back to working with like Quincy Carter and Chad Hutchinson and Tony Romo. And, people tend to forget that Sean Payton tried to get Tony Romo from the Cowboys before pondering Drew Brees. He wanted to trade for him, and Bill Parcells said, no, little Dennis, you're not getting him. And so they went and got Drew Brees instead during free agency. Parcells was not trading Tony Romo. So I'm wondering if, say, Sean were to be with Tony in New Orleans, how that would have worked out. But getting Drew, gambling on him health-wise, look, it all came together. And, there's a reason why they're going to go down in history as one of the best coach quarterback duos to ever play and ever be kind of together in the game.
Oh, without question. Just the personality thing. I've always wondered what would happen if you switched like Tom Brady and Drew Brees with Bill Belichick and Sean Payton, because it just kind of seems like outward personality. Tom Brady and Sean Payton are a little more similar, although I think that Bill Belichick and Drew Brees, like they could probably go 30 hours of watching someone and nothing would be said because they're both kind of so much more introverted. But and I was always kind of,
it's funny, what's funny you mentioned that. I don't know. I think Sean and Tom would have worked really well together. They were about to work really well together.
Right.
If he would have retired in 2020, Tom would have been a Saint, and I'm sure they would have worked really well together. Now, it's funny because Tom Brady, of course, has a relationship with Bill Belichick, but Bill Belichick is a defensive guy. So a lot of the credit, like Tom Brady worked a lot just over the years with Josh McDaniels and Charlie Weiss. And so it's not like he was day in, day out
right.
working together with the head coach. So I think that was more Bill knowing the right offense and choosing the right, say, offensive coordinators to go with him, because Bill was more into defense. So it's definitely different. Bill and Tom certainly work together, but not in the same hand in hand, hours and hours on end that Sean and Drew worked together. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting debate to see who would have worked better. Like I would have assumed that Tom and Sean would have worked hand in hand. But you're wondering if Drew, how he would have meshed with like Charlie Weiss, or how he would have meshed with like Josh McDaniels and some other offensive coordinators. And I'm sure he would have been great because Drew's a great player, but that's an interesting hypothetical that I'm wondering. We'll never know, but I would have wondered to see how that would have worked out if they would have swapped places somewhere along the line.
Yeah, now I'm kind of thinking about it as well, because you do forget that Bill Belichick, for as much as there's the Tom Brady years in the Super Bowl, that, yeah, he is a defensive-minded coach. So that is kind of interesting to think about. And I've just kind of been curious about that kind of philosophy as well. I think that the answer tends to trend towards, offensive-minded head coaches. But are you someone that has a preference on the head coaches that you've kind of been drawn to? Or do you just think it's kind of a question of not this either side of the ball being that important at all, if that makes sense?
Well, in terms of your head coach, I think it's just, if you're a defensive guy, you better make sure you've got an offensive guru that can make things happen, and vice versa. And look, Sean struggled with that, going through a lot of defensive coordinators over the years. So you've got to get the right guy, because you can't claim to know everything. And even though Sean Payton and Bill Parcells are straight from the Parcells and Bill Belichick are straight from the Parcells tree, certainly different philosophies of expertise. They know defense and the other knows offense, but they're not geniuses of everything. So I think with Bill Parcells, he got the right guys over the years. I think Sean Payton at times got the right guys over the years on the defensive side and got the wrong guys. And even when he had the right guy, he clashed with them. And then, oh, by the way, you have this bounty scandal that results of what happens. So yeah, I'm sure he doesn't take back his time with Greg Williams, but it's not like they're buddies. So with Sean Payton, so it's definitely a give and take. So I think you can win. Let's just look, Bill Belichick is a defensive guy, and he's won plenty of Super Bowls. Now you're looking at who are the favorites, say, in the NFL right now. The Chiefs, Andy Reid, he's an offensive guy. You look at maybe like the Bills, Sean McDermott, he's a defensive guy. You look at the Bengals, Zach Taylor, he's an offensive guy. So if you got but you look at if they got the right guys on the other side, that helps. So I think I don't really have a preference. You can look at right now with the Saints. I mean, Dennis Allen's a defensive guy. I'm sure people are wondering, is Dennis the right fit? Because he's a defensive guy, and he doesn't have Sean Payton around, and Pete Carmichael, is he the right guy? So it's definitely I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but if you're one, you better make sure you've got a good complement to make sure the other works well. And, that you saw that for years with the Patriots. You saw that obviously you saw that for a good span from 17 to 20. I mean, Sean Payton and Dennis Allen worked extremely well, and Dennis Allen had a great sense of the defense and made that an asset instead of a liability. And Sean had a lot of faith in Dennis. And I don't have a preference, and it's just you better make sure you got the right guy on the other side where you're not a quote unquote expert.
Yeah, no, it's a good point about that. I think you also, you do run the risk of offensive coordinators getting hired away, but it does kind of just make you think about Dennis Allen's first year and the fact that, he's not an offensive guy. And I think that you have to kind of figure out your time to be able to seek out who you can help kind of bolster that side of things. But he also, had Andy Dalton at quarterback, but, you brought up Bountygate, and as much as that's kind of this black mark kind of thing, it always strikes me that that's really the only time in NFL history where a current head coach was gone for an entire year. And to me, it was almost kind of a really good control if you were looking at an experiment here of you still had Drew Brees out there, but that season, from what I remember, was just, a complete disaster. And as someone that was covering that, how big of a void did it kind of feel? And granted, it wasn't just Sean Payton, it was, I believe, Joe Vitt, and then he was suspended halfway through the season or something. There was just so much turnover. But kind of what was that like?
Definitely bizarre. You could tell that there was a void there. Look, the Saints have to be the only team in the history of the NFL where they had an interim to the interim head coach for 6 weeks when Aaron Cromer was the head coach. And then Joe Vitt came back. And then Sean Payton was able to return in January of 2013. His big hurrah comeback was at the Senior Bowl. And when you think of it in that season, the Saints, their head coach was Aaron Cromer. Then it was Joe Vitt. Their defensive coordinator was Steve Spagnuolo, who Sean Payton never worked with. Never worked with. Hired him, then maybe worked together for a little bit, then got suspended, then he was gone. Never worked with him day in and day out in a practice field. Never worked with him in game situations. And then a day and a half when Sean Payton got back, he fired Steve Spagnuolo. So, and then he hired Rob Ryan, and it was, of course, another big blustery personality where it worked one year, didn't work the rest. So, but yeah, there was definitely a void there. Joe Vitt, he's a guy who had been kind of an interim head coach at times throughout his career, but has always been really a defensive coordinator / position coach. Not one to really want to get up there and do the media thing. I know most head coaches don't really want to do it anyway, but they have to. They know it's part of the job. Joe could avoid it at all costs and would love to do it forever. Never talk to the media. It's funny. I actually had a long-standing thing where I had a 4-year request that I wanted to interview Joe Vitt every day, and he would just walk by and point and laugh at me. And I'm like, I'm still waiting to interview you, Joe. This request is going on 4 years now, but no, it was definitely a void, and it shows you that even though you could have a team coming off one of the best seasons of their franchise history, arguably the best, actually, in my opinion, that team was better than a 2009 team in 2011. If they get by
the 49ers.
Yeah. If they get by the 49ers, they win the Super Bowl. They were Vegas would have had them as the odds on favorite to win the Super Bowl going forward. So when you look at it in that sense, you have really great momentum. You do lose a couple of players in the offseason, and you're trying to sign players, and they didn't exactly sign players that came in and bolstered them big time in 2012. But you could tell that there was definitely a difference there. And the cloud was hovering over them because players were still going through fighting for their professional lives in the season. and it was really just a mess of a season. One of the easily toughest seasons I've ever had to deal with as the beat reporter covering them. And so for the players, it was doubly taxing because every week you're wondering, all right, is Will Smith going to play? Is Jonathan Vilma going to play? And then you've got just all these things hovering. You switching head coaches. Mickey Loomis was gone for half the season. He was suspended for 8 games. And so it was definitely when Sean Payton came back in 2013, there was rejuvenation. They kind of got back on track. But then like it goes back to a season where, and I'll put it to you this way. We talked about a little while ago about how a head coach, look, they could be an expert on one side. Hopefully they have the right guy on the other side. That offseason going from 2013 to 2014, Sean Payton kind of stuck his nose too far into the defense. He wanted to make them more like the Legion of Boom. It really messed with what was going on that side of the football. And the defense went from playing very well in one season to really being a liability again the next 3 seasons. So it's almost like, all right, you got to be able to kind of manage yourself in that sense. And, sometimes it gets away from you. And I think you saw that with Sean Payton. So it's kind of one of those you live and you learn moments for him.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been thinking that over since we kind of talked about the defense versus offensive thing, because now that I'm kind of thinking about it, I think that it's kind of, if you looked at a lot of coaches that at least for a time period that there is kind of that blind spot, but also just like the value of context there where, Bountygate doesn't happen. I don't think he comes in and tries to overcorrect to the degree that he does, but I just think that complete loss of control and communication, and you're right, after building up all of that momentum of that season beforehand, because I would really agree with you. I'm trying to think of what the difference in makeup was in that team, but I forgot Pierre Thomas got like concussed in the first 10 plays of that game. But I really think what it was that they had Jimmy Graham, and I don't think that the NFL had really figured him out yet. And I just kind of feel like that really was the relationship that was lost the most in that kind of Bountygate mess, was really what I think would have been one of the more, like, I think they could have surpassed Gronkowski and Brady with ease. Like, just how was that connection like? Again, being someone that was covering that, is I just didn't feel like there had been a connection like that before or after that with a tight end for Drew.
Yeah, well, there's definitely, it helps that Jimmy Graham. Well, all you got to do is look at the rest of Jimmy Graham's career. He was never the same guy.
Right.
No wide receiver that's ever left the Saints to go play somewhere else had ever been any better. The case in point was actually Robert Meacham. I mean, they kind of scammed the Chargers. I mean, they gave him a big deal. He only lasted 1 year there and had to come back and was a minimal piece. So Drew Brees definitely made a lot of careers. I mean, there's no question about it. But if you're looking at, say, from 2011 to 2012, offensively, look, I think they were still in sync, but also it put pressure offensively on themselves big time, because 2012 was historically at that point the worst pass defense in the history of the NFL. They gave up the most yards passing ever. So they were always comeback. They were always in the comeback mode. And it's definitely a point where what do? You don't have your offensive head coach. You have a defensive coordinator and things aren't going well. Offense, they still be able to put up points, but they're always in comeback mode. And so, yeah, I think that and then when you look at, say, Sean Payton and his relationship with Drew Brees, and then you get back to, say, a tight end with Jimmy Graham. Look, after that season, that was his monster year. And then as you go on down the line, still had good years, but also Jimmy was certainly looking for a new contract. I think that kind of played into a little bit of what he wanted to do and where he wanted to be within the offense. And, I don't know if Rob Gronkowski is the same guy if he's not with Tom Brady. I mean, that's the thing too. So he could have been a very good tight end, but I think Tom Brady also, he's not had Pro Bowl wide receivers outside of Randy Moss, like for only a blip really in his career. And, it was really him and Gronk. And then for Drew, it was really him and Jimmy. And the next time Drew Brees had a Pro Bowl skill position player was Michael Thomas, because Marcus Colston never made the Pro Bowl, even though you could argue he should have, which I think he should have. Him being quiet didn't help his cause, which is a bummer because Marcus is one of the most professional and hardest working guys I've covered in my span in the NFL. But yeah, I think we won't know how that connection, say, with Gronk and Tom Brady, if that would have been different, because they've only really played together. So,
Yeah.
Tom Brady left for Tampa, so did Gronk. So you never know. And with Jimmy, he had some okay seasons with Russell Wilson and around, but he was never that guy. And Drew, here, the difference there, Drew was able to move on and have really bring Ben Watson kind of a career rejuvenation as a receiver. So again, Drew really helps some of the skill position players become solid to good to great. And I think that's really a testament to how good some of these quarterbacks are, and don't take them for granted, especially if you're playing with them and you want to go somewhere else. Don't take that for granted.
Yeah, Ben Watson is the only really modern day example I can think of outside of Jimmy Graham, who really made things credible. But it is really fascinating just thinking about the fact that he went to play with Russell Wilson, and like that's Sean Payton's new quarterback. I just am really curious to see kind of what he does in Denver from that perspective. But from the outside looking in, I no offense to Nathaniel Hackett, but I don't think you could really have done a worse job in several facets, at least in terms of clock management. Like when the stadium is kind of counting down the clock and you're not really aware of it. So I think that they immediately get the typical things that a coach should be really able to do. But, how do you kind of see him approaching Russell Wilson? He was a more mobile quarterback back in the day, but he's not that much so anymore. But I know that he really, likes really the deep vertical passing game. And do you see Sean Payton kind of changing his philosophy to fit Russell Wilson's, or meeting them more in the middle? Or how do you see him kind of approaching that relationship, watching, his with Drew, albeit them being very different personality types?
Yeah, well, with Hackett, he was in over his head. I mean, let's be honest with you. Denver brought in Hackett hoping they would get Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that's what they did. So,
yeah.
and look, we've chronicled the rise and fall of Russell Wilson a ton over the years at The Athletic, with some awesome reporting by some of our reporters, and even people I've talked to going up to that. I remember he was kind of being trade bait, and people I talked to who actually was in the front office in Seattle in those years, and telling me that they wouldn't trust Russell Wilson. And goes to fruition that after he left Seattle, that he was regressing there, and all the stories that he was losing the locker room. And, you have all these things. And look, Sean Payton knows he has to rebuild Russell Wilson. I mean, does he have, I know he got injured last year, but Russell Wilson, it's almost like people thought of him as being the Hollywood quarterback, living the Hollywood life. And I think Sean Payton's basically got to break down Russell and say, all right, this is what you got to do. And for as much as the comparisons they've had over the years with Russell and Drew being the same size, that sort of thing, like he's got to be more like Drew. I don't know. I'm curious to see if that can happen, because Russell Wilson, he certainly likes to do the deep ball, and that's kind of been a feast or famine with him. How much will they use his mobility? I'll be curious to see that. But yeah, it's definitely a bit of a deconstruction for Sean and Russell Wilson. And when Sean went to Denver, I was wondering what he thought of Russell Wilson, because I thought maybe the regression of Russell Wilson might keep him away. But I know Sean, and he wants to be a savior. Let's go save Denver. Let's go save Russell Wilson. I think that's part of what he wants to do there. And yeah, I'm going to be keeping an eye on it because look, we saw Sean work with Drew for so long, and then he doesn't work with Drew for 1 year, and he's like, "Peace, I'm out of here. I'm going to go be on TV and then figure out a better situation." So it's definitely where Sean has to help Russell become more like him, or actually even take some of the bad habits away he was having in Seattle. And so it's definitely a thing where I think Denver's got the skill positions to be able to do it. I think getting Javonte Williams back as their top running back, get a run game going, that would help too. But yeah, there's definitely an upgrade from Nathaniel Hackett to Sean Payton. No doubt about it. But it's more going to be, is Russell Wilson going to be receptive to what Sean is asking for? Because Sean is not going to be, he's not going to placate to what they right away, they had where Russell Wilson had his own room and take things like Sean's like, that's done. I mean, he said that publicly, that's done. And that's basically Russell, get on board. And look, they've got to make this thing work because Denver's done so much to kind of pin themselves to Sean, pin themselves to Russell Wilson for the next couple of years. So they've got to make this work, or Russell will be gone and Sean will be having to develop a new quarterback or trying to go get another one in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's to me from the outside, it almost felt like he took the job kind of in spite of Russell Wilson, just because, the contract that they gave him, that he's kind of stuck there with him. But, to bring up that really incredible reporting from The Athletic, because I remember reading that and being like, oh, geez, like, I didn't know that Super Bowl loss affected the Seahawks like that badly. But it just goes to show you like how much a bad loss can really deconstruct a team. But it's interesting too, because Pete Carroll is a defensive minded head coach. And I don't think it matters as much as, we're kind of talking about here. But to me, it kind of looked like Pete Carroll took the approach of just letting him simmer in the corner more. And I see Sean as more kind of an in your face, like get with this or get off the pot kind of thing. So I am really curious because he's not a rookie, he's an adult, and he's said, I want to go out and win another Super Bowl, and show to Sean Payton. So they have that shared goal of kind of a challenge Russell Wilson took a huge risk essentially in going to Denver. Because I think if he had just finished out his career in Seattle, you could place the blame here, there, elsewhere. But, they went to this Super Bowl loaded team and just had a horrible head coach to start off. But I am curious to see if he almost takes the approach that he did to Jameis Winston, where really kind of restricting that deep passing game and really leaning on the run game. It'll just be just a question of balancing more of a personality and, in fairness, more of a starter who's gone to multiple Super Bowls at this point. So it's not like, Russell Wilson doesn't have any credibility to back him up, but that'll be a really interesting management of personalities to me, because I just kind of watched again on that NFL Films about the Phil Simms situation with Bill Parcells and how contentious that was at one point, but how they eventually ended up mending that. And it's just, to me, with the, not in a bad way, but the egos going on with quarterback and head coach, it to me is just such a delicate balance. And I'm really curious to watch play out there.
Yeah, well, Pete Carroll basically let Russell Wilson become what happened, more like the diva guy. I mean, he let it happen. And I think that rubbed people the wrong way within the Legion of Boom defense. I mean, he started losing kind of that locker room with all those star-studded defensive players. I mean, he was losing it while they were still there. And those guys left and Russell stuck around, and, Seattle didn't have nearly the same success. Russell had the same success. Like, he was still 100+ passer rating, Pro Bowl quarterback. I mean, his numbers were falling over, from maybe the last 3 years. I mean, they were progressively falling, but they were still at a top flight level. But they were falling. I mean, he was diminishing. And then Russell comes in and has the worst year of his career last year. And so I do think that Russell has to have an ego check. And I think that I don't look, I've met Russell Wilson once, so I don't know the guy. But look, I think having Sean Payton come in, I think he knows he's got to check his ego. And Sean Payton said, look, he worked with Drew Brees, who is not the diva guy. Like, he is the workaholic guy. And Russell's got to embrace some of that. And for this to work, and I think, look, they have a shared goal. They want to win another Super Bowl for the team, but also it would cement Russell Wilson as a Hall of Fame quarterback. I think he's a Hall of Fame quarterback as it is. I mean, hot take of the day, I don't know. But I think Russell Wilson is a Hall of Fame quarterback. I think Sean Payton needs another Super Bowl to become a Hall of Fame coach. They do that together, they will both be in Canton. So I think that is a huge motivation for both. I think that Sean Payton he's certainly going in with I'm going to go with the philosophy that got the offense rolling in New Orleans. He's got skill position players that I think will work. They revamped that offensive line in Denver. I mean, I think that is going to be a huge plus. They went out and made significant moves, bringing in free agents that were kind of the top flight free agents on position groups to revamp that offensive line. And it worked for the Saints, and they're going to try to work that in Denver. And so, but yeah, I think with the Sean Russell dynamic, that's a lot of what people are going to watch throughout the year league wide. And it also goes back to, I mean, look, the genesis of this conversation is Bill Parcells and kind of that. Like, Bill Parcells was able to really connect with the star player and then connect with the 52nd guy. Sean Payton's been able to do that over the years. I'm curious to see if he's able to do that with Russell Wilson, where he's kind of maybe he's set in his own ways, and you got to break those habits. So it's different because Drew Brees has always had good habits, and Russell Wilson obviously has developed some bad habits. And so I'm curious to see if he can kind of break through and get him to change kind of his mentality and the way he presents himself on the field, in decision making, and presents himself off the field with working hard and kind of being a leader in the locker room.
Yeah, and really getting rid of that office is probably the first thing to do about that. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine in my head, like in my head, it's a glass room in the middle of the locker room that he just goes in and shuts the door, and everyone can see him. But you just kind of think about the unity that brought together the Saints after, the Katrina year. And granted, there, thankfully is no tragedy to bring together a team. But I think when you see how important team unity is from the top down in that kind of situation, it's hard to kind of then, look at diva type behaviors and really have the patience for it. And I really wouldn't blame him to a degree. Just, again, kind of having to deal with what he dealt with in New Orleans. But, just as kind of a closing remark, what would you say that your favorite aspect about covering Sean was, either as a personality, as a coach, or just like a certain game that stuck out to you that really sticks with you from his coaching?
Well, he's blunt, I would say. And I think that is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that even whether it's to players, I mean, everybody knows the mantra of Game Day Sean. And it's funny, our Broncos reporter, Nick Kosmider, to introduce Sean Payton to kind of the Broncos fan base, he did a big story, and I helped him out with it and did a bunch of interviews about Game Day Sean, that he's intense. And I think that's that mentality is, he is full blast, full force, going to step on the throttle, right or wrong. He's going to believe in his convictions. And so I think that's a big thing. And he's been a lot more right than he has been wrong. Has he been wrong plenty enough? I mean, yes, look, it's on the record, 7-9, 7-9, 7-9, but he's also won a Super Bowl, been to multiple NFC championship games, had one of the greatest offenses in the history of the NFL. So, but he's also done some things where, the future quarterback's Taysom Hill. No, the future quarterback's not Taysom, so like he's definitely in his convictions, but still, I think when you look at it, that is his personality. And I think that's what makes him great. But sometimes it can be a fault, but it's mostly what's made him great. And I think that's something that I can appreciate with him. We've gone through battles. It's been documented in media where we've had our battles throughout the years. But look, I respect him for it. It's he's trying to do a job. I'm trying to do my job. This, that, and the other, and there's mutual respect there. But I think that's the thing. When you kind of can talk it out and be honest to each other, like Sean could be honest to the team. This, that, and the other. There's a dialogue most of the time. I mean, if you get in Sean's doghouse, sometimes there's no getting out. But I think though that he's someone who is been able to relate, and whether he's got a conviction, but he could still relate. And I think that's what's kind of been able to keep him going with the same kind of zest. And I think he's super excited for this opportunity. And like I said, from afar, I'm going to be watching, even though Saints fans probably are tired of hearing about it, but I'm sure Saints fans are going to want to watch too, to see what he can do, maybe even out of spite. But still, I think that there's definitely going to be a curiosity here in New Orleans.
All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Again, that's Larry Holder with The Athletic, and someone that really, again, has seen the entire career of Sean Payton and his time on the Saints. And I really liked how we ended our closing remarks there, and him talking about how, Sean Payton is someone that has courage in his convictions. And if you ask me what the most important takeaway I've had in a lot of this head coach exploration series, a lot of it is that relationship building and trust, but you also have to really have courage in your convictions in what you do. And that's something I think that applies to a lot of things in life outside the game of football. It's something that I really live by when it comes to, moral convictions, but also sports. You have to kind of be willing to have a take sometimes and be willing to accept that might be wrong. But having the ability to have courage in your convictions is something that I think is what really separates Sean Payton as one of the greats. But as Larry put it at the end, and I could not agree more with that there is a necessity of mutual respect there in order to get away with being blunt and honest and being that, courageous in your convictions in that way. You have to be able to talk things out and be honest. And his talking about Sean's ability to relate to players. A lot of this talk with the younger offensive minded head coaches was the idea that they could relate better to today's players. And to me, that's almost kind of a crossover or bleed over effect from the NBA in a way, where I think we have kind of seen these younger coaches relate better to today's players. But I think we might just have a perception bias here of age being the automatic qualifier. Whereas, I just think of someone like Willie Fritz, who is also not a young coach, and he's able to relate to college students at that point. So to me, it's really not age that matters. It's just your ability to relate to other human beings and perhaps identify your own blind spots. And that can apply to a lot of things, including sometimes, thinking that you're the smartest person in the room. And as we talked about, there are times where, and I thought this was a very interesting conversation topic of that idea of a defensive versus an offensive minded head coach, where, yeah, when Sean Payton did kind of try to stick his nose more on the defensive side of things, I think he learned the hard way that you got to stick to what you know and you excel at, and hire the people around you that are capable of doing those other roles. And it does give a lot of credence to Dennis Allen and how symbiotic they really were, and how much trust he awarded Dennis Allen to really run that defense as someone that, I think Sean Payton is someone that likes to have a lot of control. And that's going to be, again, something that I'm really curious about, watching his relationship grow with Russell Wilson, because he is kind of very different from Drew Brees. As we talked about, with all the comparisons, it really is just kind of their height being that comparative point. And I know that Russell Wilson has said in the past that he's kind of wanted to emulate Drew Brees, but just his play style, again, it's one that it's a little risky. And Sean Payton likes to take risks, but I'm not sure he likes to take them with throwing passes in the air. And so I am curious to see, because it's not the same situation as Jameis Winston, where he was a starter, but then he wasn't. And really, I don't think that many offers elsewhere, and took, $1 million deals to sit at that point as third string quarterback when Drew was still here behind Taysom Hill, just to be able to learn from that room. And then have a quarterback competition. And so I think it's a little easier to apply a more conservative approach to that. But I'll be curious, because I also think that there's no football player that makes it in the league and gets to Super Bowls like Russell Wilson has without having that inherent competitive drive. And I just think the difference from Pete Carroll to Nathaniel Hackett, first of all, and again, I don't mean to really just keep piling on this guy, but you have to, clock management is just so essential. And like Larry said, he was just in so over his head. But I just, again, I'm going to be curious to kind of see how that relationship unfolds, thinking about that coaching tree and how that really ties together with that most important role and being able to manage that one way or another. But this talk just kind of helped really round that out. And I do think that Saints fans, sometimes it is just fun to follow a team that you're not so emotionally invested in and that is not giving you heartbreak for year after year at a time. And I'm someone that'll probably be covering to an extent on this show a little bit, but I do kind of want to follow along with the Broncos and Sean Payton and Dan Campbell and the Lions and just kind of enrich that conversation of watching a coaching tree really unfold live. So that's all for today's show. And, as we're kind of heading into training camp, I think that I'm going to start kind of moving into those breakdowns now for Tulane and the Saints, because as much as I talked about this being a dead period, well, before you know it, just in like 2 weeks time now, training camp's going to be going and the gas pedal is going to be hit and there won't be that much time to slow down and smell the roses. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed, again, just kind of exploratory series that I've been able to do in this downtime. And it's something that I want to continue to kind of bring throughout the season as it unfolds and use it as kind of a looking at coaching as a season goes, but ultimately focusing a little more on the football aspect. So again, I thank Larry so much for his time and everything he's really done for me in this industry as someone to look up to. And with that, I will see you on Tuesday.